A lot of you know that I've been using this Accsoon CineEye for about a year now. I have shot 2 feature films with it, I used it on a slew of corporate shoots, and a handful of short films as well. So there's no denying that the clients and directors love having that reference monitor on set, something they can see the framing and composition of the shot, as well as being able to apply a LUT to the pictures so they have an idea of what the finished product may end up looking like. It allows everyone to have their own space on set. You don't have people breathing over someone else's shoulder, and also you just appear more professional having that video village option. So a couple weeks ago, this company called Hollyland reached out to me and asked me to take a look at their wireless video transmitter system, the Mars 400S. Obviously I said yes, I was pumped to do that, and literally just a few days later, AndyCine emailed me and asked me to review their new transmitter as well, the Benbox. So here we are, 3 different options, 3 different budgets, 3 different devices for wireless video transmitting, and I put all of them to the test. So I've been using the Accsoon CineEye not only as a low budget option for the past year, but also have been using it quite frequently as a tool to pull focus with. When I first got this unit about a year ago, I put out a video showing my little DIY first AC monitor for pulling focus, and I've literally used that quite a few times on set. There was a feature film that I was hired to be the director of photography on, and we actually had a Steadicam operator on set with us for a couple days, and luckily for that producer, I just happened to have the Accsoon CineEye with me. So I threw it up there on the Steadicam, and our first AC actually pulled the focus off of my iPad in the Tilted Nucleus Nano. Now, how someone has the budget for a Steadicam op and not a proper wireless video transmitter is beyond me. These are not questions that I can answer. I was literally just hired to be the DP. But if you're interested in that kind of lifestyle, want to see more kind of behind the scenes of a DIY low-budget indie filmmaker out here in the Super Bowl of the filmmaking community, otherwise known as LA, then I highly recommend you check us out over on the Dog Times Patreon. It's just a cool little group of independent filmmakers. I put out an exclusive members only video once a week, and also members have free access to some free downloads and resources that I use in my own workflow, such as the LUTs I've been creating for the Pocket 4K, and the Discord private chat really gives it a cool clubhouse feel. And I know that's a very shameless self-promotion, but the reality is this channel does not have any sponsors except for the Patreon community. So I have to take time and give a shout out and say thank you to all of my supporters over there on the Dog Times Patreon. And now back to the nature at hand. I tested each of these wireless video transmitters in situations that would actually resemble real-world working scenarios. We're going to be looking at the startup time of each of these devices. We do a proper speed test. We look at the latency issues when pulling focus directly off of the camera versus pulling focus from the wireless video signal with a wireless follow focus. I also set up an ideal video village that is similar to scenarios and sets that I have personally worked on. And finally, I do an outdoor distance test. But before any testing, I want to compare the units themselves. First up is the Mars 400S. Now, this is a dual system with a transmitter and a receiver. This is more akin to your industry standard units, something like a Teradek. What is nice about this is you have both HDMI and SDI connections. Now, with the Mars 400S, the HDMI can accept a 1080p signal up to 60 frames per second, while the SDI accepts 1080p up to 24 frames per second. So you have the option to connect to a real reference monitor, either using the HDMI or SDI, as well as the Hollyland can send out its own Wi-Fi signal to 4 additional devices like phones or iPads through the HollyView app. They have nice little OLED screens, so you always know what channel you're on. There's also a really cool smart scan system that shows you what channels are better in whatever area you're shooting in. You can monitor the life of your battery. Speaking of which, these things are powered by your normal Sony MPF batteries, otherwise known as Sony L series batteries. And one cool little feature that I personally like is it has a physical on-off toggle switch, which is a favorite of mine. Now, the AndyCine Benbox is definitely the most compact of the 3, so it's gonna win for design alone. It has no antennas to worry about getting broken off. It's super small, but still heavy duty, and I really love that it has this built-in all-metal cold shoe mount. It connects through HDMI with a 1080p signal up to 60 frames per second, and it can send out and connect to 4 devices at once, just like the Mars 400S, and it connects through its own little app called Inky. What's really cool about the Benbox and this CineEye is that they both have built-in internal batteries, but they can be powered via USB-C all day long. So this is really cool if you have something like the Sunwell B98 V-mount batteries, or even something like the Landpart V-mount base plate. They have built-in USB ports, and you can just run these bad boys all day long. The only downside of the design of both the Benbox and the CineEye is that they have these soft power buttons that you have to push and hold and wait to turn on. And with the Benbox, you have to double tap and then hold, and it's just a tad tedious. The CineEye is the one with the most odd design, in my opinion, out of these three units. As you can see, the antennas are literally the same height as the unit itself, but it's still pretty thin, you know, it's not too chunky, and at least these antennas are foldable for easy transportation. This, just like the Benbox, has an HDMI that can accept a 1080p signal up to 60 frames per second. The downside with the CineEye is that it can only send out its Wi-Fi signal and connect to 2 devices at once through the Accsoon app. Now let's look at the startup time of each of these units.
Scars of your darkest night, in the morning light, and I have waited for you, I have waited so long, but
So one of my biggest pet peeves of working with this Accsoon CineEye for the past year on paid gigs is waiting around for that startup time and reconnecting to the app. Not only do you have to wait for your device to find the Wi-Fi signal and connect, but then you have to wait for it to connect to the app. So this is the downside of working with apps when it comes to like the Benbox and the CineEye units. Now some people may not have an issue with the time that takes, but in my experience in working with this CineEye specifically on paid gigs is on a real shoot, when you are, when there's downtime in between setups and the camera's sitting idle, or you have to swap batteries and then you have to reconnect the device, sometimes reboot the whole device itself, refresh the app, you're just talking about a lot of time getting killed on set. So just for reference here, as a real life scenario, in working with the Accsoon CineEye, there was a feature I was the DP on, and we had 2 Pocket 4Ks shooting at once, as you can see from this BTS here. And in that scenario, we did have a script supervisor on set because Video Village is a necessity for continuity. So we had a hardwired BNC cable running to one camera, connecting SDI via the Portkeys BM5 monitor, while the other camera was sending out the Wi-Fi signal from the Accsoon CineEye. And I learned right then and there on that particular set that the Accsoon CineEye is just not ideal for scenarios where you're swapping locations and setups all the time because of that issues with the app and Wi-Fi reconnecting. And in my experience, it kind of does better in just one location, kind of talking head interview kind of setups. So for those reasons alone, the app issues, and just my own experiences in real world working scenarios, something like the Mars 400S is going to be way more reliable because you have a real monitor. But also keep in mind that if you are into that idea of Wi-Fi and apps, that the Mars 400S can not only give you access to a real reference monitor, but it also can send out its own Wi-Fi signal and connect up to 4 additional devices. So in this category, for startup time, flexibility, and reliability, hands down, the Mars 400S is definitely the winner. Up next is our series of tests where things really get interesting, and I know it's what you've all been waiting for. It's the latency tests. I did a few different tests here for multiple different reasons. Now on paper, the Accsoon CineEye is rated at having only a 60 millisecond latency, while the Mars 400S is 100 milliseconds, while the Benbox comes in at 150 milliseconds of latency. But that's just on paper. I had to test these units and compare for myself. Our first scenario here is just a super simple speed test. The Hollyland Mars 400S has this really cool option on the transmitter itself where you can go in and change the scene mode to have better image quality, or you can put it on speed mode to have less latency, or you can put it on a setting to have a balance of both. So this is a really simple test, but I also think it's a super easy way just to find out right out of the gate which one of these devices has the least amount of latency. Okay, here we go. We're just gonna make this super quick and simple here, and So our next scenario here is more of your one-man band type situations. Here I pull focus directly off of the camera itself with a manual follow focus, and when I was doing these tests, I was only paying attention to the LCD monitor on the Pocket 4K itself. But what you all will be watching is not only the LCD monitor on the back of the Pocket 4K, but you'll also see the reference monitors that each of the wireless signals are being sent to. And the reason for doing this particular test is because I wanted to show what kind of latency issues your client or directors may experience while looking at those reference monitors, but also I wanted to make sure it was closer than your normal ideal Video Village option to see if it made any difference, because we will be looking later on at a real Video Village scenario. Okay, we're gonna go back to number 6. We're gonna come up to number 1. 6, 1. Okay, now I'm just gonna jump back and forth, all the way back to the bookshelf, all the way back to number 1. Bookshelf, 1. Bookshelf, 1. I'm calling them out as I'm landing on it. 1. Bookshelf, 1. Bookshelf, 1. Bookshelf. 6, 1, 6, 3, 1, 6, bookshelf, 1, bookshelf, 1, bookshelf, 1, bookshelf, 1, 3, 6, 1, 6, 3, 1, 6, 1, 6, 1, 6, 1, bookshelf. Bookshelf, 1, bookshelf, 1, 3, 6, 1, 3, 6, 1, bookshelf, 1, bookshelf, 1, 3, 6, 1, 6, 1, 6, 1. Now our next scenario here is something more akin to if you had an actual first AC working with you and pulling focus for you. So let's see what happens when I swap out that manual follow focus with the Tilta Nucleus Nano. And in this test, I was pulling focus off of the reference monitors that the wireless video transmitters were sending signal to, and using that focus wheel of the Tilta Nucleus Nano. Now, when talking about latency and focus pulling in particular, I do have to point out the fact that I am aware that the best focus pullers in the industry do not rely on monitors at all. I hate to break it to you guys, but there are certain circles that would be laughing at us talking about pulling focus off of monitors. I just wanted to say I am aware of this fact, but I'm also aware of the fact that I believe the majority of my audience are folks that are looking for monitors to pull focus off of. I'm on 1, jumping back to 6, 1, 6, 1, bookshelf, 1, bookshelf, 1. One, 3, 1, 3, bookshelf, 1, bookshelf, 1, bookshelf, 1, bookshelf, 1. Okay. Okay, bookshelf, 1, bookshelf, 1, loud neighbors, bookshelf, 1, bookshelf, 1, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, bookshelf, 1. Finally, our last latency test is set up more as a realistic Video Village scenario. So in my experience, when shooting on location or even in a studio setting, Video Village is never really more than 50 feet away. Now at first, 50 feet really doesn't sound that far, and that's because it's actually not. 50 feet is only the same length of one full-sized yellow school bus. But to put it into perspective for you, even the big Hollywood studios like Warner Brothers and Paramount, even those sound stages over there are only 150 feet long, which is the length of 3 yellow school buses. And in my experience, from my acting career, I've never been in a scenario where Video Village is all the way over on the other side of the soundstage. So in my opinion, 50 feet is actually pretty normal for a realistic distance for Video Village. So in these tests, as you'll see from these overheads here of the shot design, the camera is on the opposite side of the house, where Video Village is way down the hall into another room entirely, and it was actually only about 45 to 50 feet away. Now for these tests, you have to pay attention to the audio. The GH5 is the camera that's recording the reference monitors in Video Village, and the audio from that GH5 is actually synced with the audio from the Pocket 4K, which was recording the original footage and sending out that original video signal. But when I say synced, I synced it up later in post so we could actually really see the true latency that you'd be witnessing in a real-world Video Village scenario such as this one. So in my opinion, after looking at all 4 of these latency tests, I gotta say the Accsoon CineEye is the clear winner here. It's the most consistent, it's the most accurate, and it's the fastest. And then to my eye, I would say the Benbox comes in at second. Even though there was that weird little hiccup in that last Video Village test, something wonky there happened with the Inky app. But overall, the latency seems to be the biggest issue with the Mars 400S, which is a bit of a bummer because this is the ideal unit that you would actually use if you had a first AC, so they could actually pull focus from a real monitor, and you would still have that nice flexibility of using either HDMI or SDI connections. So for those reasons alone is why I didn't even really bother using the HollyView app, because to me the real advantage I would think of using the Mars 400S is having a real reference monitor. So the downside with pulling focus off of our little AndyCine Benbox is their app doesn't include focus peaking, and I found that really odd because it has zebras but not focus peaking. But maybe that's something that Inky and AndyCine can add later on in a firmware update. So at the end of the day, for focus pulling and latency alone, hands down the Accsoon CineEye is going to be our winner. It's just a bummer you have to pull focus off of a crappy screen from an iPhone or an iPad. Last, we have the outdoor distance test. And this is where things get a little more interesting. Now on paper, the Accsoon CineEye and the Benbox are both rated at 100 meters, which is 328 feet, while the Mars 400S is rated at a 400 feet distance. Now from what I understand, the companies came to these conclusions by testing these units in a straight shot, meaning there was a clear line of sight. Now the whole 300 feet thing really surprised me because before attempting these tests, I had no real perspective on how far 300 feet realistically is. For instance, I thought our building here in LA had to be at least 300 feet. Come to find out, it's only 175 feet long. So in this test, as you'll see here, the 175 foot mark just happened to be right where this huge metal gate is. And it's a little interesting, as you'll see in a minute here, because the metal gate introduced some interesting interference problems. But then once I walked through the gate, I rounded a corner and that introduced a whole nother set of problems. Now I'm gonna say right out the bat that the Accsoon CineEye is the winner again. Not only was I able to walk through the gate and still have signal, but when I rounded the corner, I was still able to go another 40 feet before we lost signal. With the Benbox, I also was able to get through the gate, but as soon as I rounded the corner, the video signal was dropped. Now, as far as the Mars 400S goes, something really wonky started happening to our video signal as soon as I started approaching the big metal fence, and by the time I walked through the gate, the video signal was already gone. So I'm guessing something weird is happening with that metal fence, and it's interfering with the radio signals that are being sent out by the Mars 400S, whereas it just obviously doesn't have quite the same impact on the Wi-Fi signals that were coming off of the Benbox and CineEye units. But as far as turning that corner goes, I think that's a really cool reference for a driving scenario. So for instance, if you were in a situation where you had the monitor, your iPad in this case, in one car, and then the car in front of you was the camera car, chances are if you were using the Accsoon CineEye, you could get caught up in some pretty deep traffic and even lose the camera car, and chances are you'd still have video signal. Okay, so even though I have my own beef with this Accsoon CineEye, at the end of the day, I mean, beyond its initial connectivity issues, you know, all the time waiting for the app to reconnect and waiting for the Wi-Fi, as you saw in these tests today, once you get that connection made, it's actually a solid little device. Speaking of connectivity issues, one thing I want to point out about the AndyCine Benbox is I noticed that when I powered the camera off and turned it back on, the Benbox automatically connected to the app right away, and that has not been my experience with the Accsoon app in the CineEye device. So I'm gonna give extra points to the Benbox for better connectivity. So there's a lot to unpack here, folks. The Hollyland Mars 400S system comes in at $649. That's the most expensive out of all three of these units. Meanwhile, the Accsoon CineEye retails at $249, and the Benbox is holding it down at $109. So clearly three different budgets here, but honestly, if you ask me after doing these tests, it's still really hard to choose only one. Seriously guys, at the end of the day, it just kind of comes down to what are the demands of the projects that you're working on. Do you actually need a high-level reference monitor for those big executive clients? Then yeah, I would say your best bet is to go with that Mars 400S. But if you have to pull focus on that same job and you're relying on the Mars 400S for speed, I think you're gonna be dealing with some accuracy issues there. But honestly, if you guys are at a level where you're constantly working with your own first AC pulling focus for you, realistically guys, none of these three devices are going to be reliable enough tools for you. These are still low budget options, and each of them come with their own drawbacks. Personally, I hate waiting on those apps and that Wi-Fi to reconnect. I hate having to reboot that Accsoon CineEye all the time and refreshing the app. It's clearly rubbed me the wrong way, and it's primarily because it has left me losing valuable time on paid jobs. I could care less about any latency issues. I work on such low budget projects, I'm always pulling my own focus anyways. For someone like me, reliability is way more important. But at the same time, the tests have painted a little bit of a different picture for us and actually put us in a bit of a pickle. Because if you're relying on these tests alone to decide as a purchase for you, then yeah, I mean, obviously the Accsoon CineEye is the overall best unit based on the tests. But here is why I feel tests like these aren't really ideal, because the tests are not a real day on set. You're not constantly changing locations and setups and swapping angles like you would on a real shoot. And I know for someone like me that works with very minimal crew and very small budgets, reliability is key. It is number one. And honestly, I don't care what budget you're working with. At the end of the day, every second is money being spent. So if professionalism and reliability is most important to you, then I would say, yeah, you probably want to lean towards that Hollyland Mars 400S system. But if you're not so concerned with impressing the clients, or you know you're going to have a little bit more free time on set, but at the same time you know you're going to need someone else pulling focus for you, like if you have a bunch of gimbal shots to do, but there's still not a whole lot of money involved, then yeah, the Accsoon CineEye would probably be the best tool for you. Whereas something like the AndyCine Benbox, I think, is the perfect tool for your one-man band situations. I'm talking about guys that just show up with some gear in their backpack. This thing is so tiny, you can literally just throw this in your front pocket and you're still gonna look really cool and prepared, having a tool that can provide a video signal for your clients. Hey, if you're a fan of the channel and like to support, there's a couple different ways you can do that. The first and easiest way is to just hit that subscribe button and be sure to hit the bell so you get the latest videos as soon as they're dropped. But if you want to go above and beyond that and be a part of a daily filmmaking conversation, then I invite you to join the Dog Times community over on Patreon. That is where once a week I release an exclusive members-only video breaking down projects, talking gear, and sharing real-world experiences as a DIY indie filmmaker in Los Angeles. But my favorite part about the Patreon is the conversations happening over on Discord. That is where you will be connected with like-minded filmmakers and have instant access to learning ways to improve your own skills so you feel more confident about working on set as a professional. So welcome to the Dog Times community, and I'll chat with you soon.